Hello, everyone. My name is Asila, and thank you for joining us here today. So I'll be the host of this event, which is dedicated to International Women's Day, the 8th of March. And the first guest that we have here today is Dilnaz. Dilnaz, hello. Thank you for coming here. Dilnaz is an Uyghur student from London, and she was kind enough to come here and join us and to tell us of her time spent among Uyghur people, specifically women, and this whole issue with concentration camps. So Dilnaz, thank you again for coming. Now let's start off. Firstly, let me ask you, could you please introduce yourself, tell us where you are right now, perhaps what you're studying or working on?
Hello, so my name is Dilnaz Kerim and I am Uyghur. I was born and grew up in Norway and now I live in London with my family. I'm a sixth form student studying mathematics and I'm a member of the UK Uyghur community.
Could you please tell us a little bit more about your community?
So UK Uyghur community is based in the UK. Our aims are to be able to keep the Uyghur culture and pass it on to the next generation, but also to campaign for Uyghurs' freedom.
That is great, thank you. And this is going to be the topic of our today's talk. So we know that you have spent some time in East Turkestan, where a large number of Uyghurs live. So how would you describe your experience there?
I would definitely say that the experiences there was very different from where I grew up. For example, every time the people saw polices, they would panic, they would get scared. The girls, young girls, if they were wearing hijabs, they would immediately remove it. If the polices visited their houses, they would immediately hide all the religious objects. I remember the first 3 days and nights when we visited my grandmother, police from every single city and town came to my grandmother's house and they checked us, they checked our passports, visa, asked some weird questions like, why did you come here? Who did you contact with? Why do you do it in your daily basis? And I realized that all my female cousins, they would immediately remove their headscarves. They would immediately hide all their religious objects like the Quran, the sajjada, and it was very unusual for me because where I grew up, we used to treat the police like other people. We used to not panic, but I didn't understand that much why they did that till today. Now I realize that they had to go through a lot of pressures. That pressure didn't just start today, but it did start a long time ago.
Yes, that is terrible. And what is it like to be an Uyghur woman there? We're aware that women have been, physically and mentally abused, forced into sexual torture, and forced into labor and separated from their children.
So at that time, what I witnessed was that they had to go through slave labor. So the government would tell them what to grow. So with my family, they had to grow and pick cotton, and they had to give it for free to the government. But I just learned about that just recently. I knew they were picking cotton, though I didn't know that it was for free, that they had to do it. If they stood against the government, they would be given penalty and they would even be imprisoned. I wouldn't say that the way Uyghur women were going through different pressure compared to men. I would say that they were going through pretty similar pressures.
I see, I see. And what kind of labor was most common maybe for that time for a woman to have? How were they affected by that?
At that time, the common slave labor was farming, growing cotton and picking cotton. This is what I witnessed. But at the moment, it's like working in factory and maybe even worse, but we don't know.
And what kind of fears or concerns did Uyghurs have nowadays or maybe before?
With my relatives, I realized that they have the fear of being imprisoned because recently I read this Uyghur roman. It's called Anayurt. It talks about the 1930s to end of 1940s, how the Uyghurs had to go through all of the difficulties. And it talks about this 20 ways of torturing Uyghur people, which was created by the CCP. One of them was to pick all the nails. One of them was to take all the tooth one by one. One of them was to put them on cold weather outside and splash ice cold water. It was very difficult hardships. And because my people knew about this torture, I think one of their biggest fear was to get imprisoned because they don't want to go through these hardships. At the moment, we don't know because we've lost contact with my relatives now for nearly 6 years. At that time, I could see that one of the biggest fears was to get imprisoned. In that case, my father was actually imprisoned for nearly a year for studying and practicing Islam. And he said that at the end of his imprisonment, he was in this condition where he could not stand by himself.
This is unspeakable of, I think this is why we need to, share and make people aware of things that are happening outside their countries.
Mm-hmm.
So please let me move on to another question. Did any living conditions change between the times when you were small and lived there and nowadays? And if you could tell us what exactly?
At the moment, I don't know whom of my relatives are alive or whom of them are dead or whom of them are in concentration camps. But at that time, they had to work for free, basically work as slavery. They had basically nothing for income. And on top of that, if they did a small mistake, they had to pay heavy penalties, which I think is very unfair. At the moment, we get this news about these concentration camps, about moving Uyghurs to mainland China and forcibly work them in factories, even replacing Chinese spies into Uyghur homes. It's very horrible, the situations that are happening in East Turkestan.
I think it's important that we should ask how, Uyghurs or women specifically combat this kind of regime, and more importantly, what we can do to help this issue.
I think the Uyghur women couldn't combat about this issue because they didn't have that opportunity. In my opinion, they were treated like robots. It's CCP can just do whatever they want. They tell them, okay, you have to grow cotton and give it to us free. And if they did little small mistakes, they will be imprisoned and they will torture in many ways, in the ways they would like. When it comes to us, I think it's very important to act up to stop this Uyghur genocide. I think, in my opinion, this now past the boundary. Genocide is something even worse than genocide. So one of the ways that people here can fight to stop the Uyghur genocide is to write letters to the MPs, support the genocide amendment, spread awareness, and most importantly, educate themselves on this Uyghur issue.
Yes, thank you, Dilnaz. I think this would be it. It was incredible, and thank you for joining us and telling us about the issues that concern the well-being of Uyghurs in China. And there are not many people who are actually aware of this issue, and this is why we're doing this live. And we want to thank you because it takes a lot of courage to speak up on this kind of issues. We wish you, your family, and everyone affected the very best. And we believe only if we work together with everybody else, we can lift their suffering and help Uyghurs. So this would be it. Thank you very much, Dilnaz.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Gabriela Rondon. She's a lawyer and human rights activist at the Brazilian feminist organization, ANIS, and the Institute of Bioethics Issues in Brazil. Hi, Gabriela.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Hi, it's amazing having you here. It's an honor. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I mean, we are living a very difficult moment of the pandemic in Brazil right now, but personally, I'm doing good, thanks.
I'm glad. I'm happy you're doing well. So we're going to be asking you a couple of questions about your working field today, if you're ready. So the first one is, as we know, you are a lawyer and also working for human rights. What kind of hardships and abuses can women face in a working field of yours? And can you also share some experiences if you had any?
Yes, I guess I have one very concrete example that might be interesting to see how difficult is the situation right now in Brazil for feminist activists and particularly those working with sexual and reproductive rights, which is the focus of the organization I work for. Currently, the main founder of my organization is living in exile due to severe death threats she's been suffering since 2018. Her name is Deborah Diniz. And so I guess this is very symbolic. She's living in exile since Bolsonaro was elected, when the attacks against feminists who work with sexual and reproductive rights, and in particular with abortion rights, have increased dramatically, having her as a target. So I guess this shows how this government is based on an anti-gender agenda, and their supporters are actively disseminating hate speech and fake news about us. That is the scenario.
And I've also heard that women working in politics in Brazil have many problems as well. I'm not sure how many women are actively working right now, but I know that's a very, very small percentage. And I have read that they have been heavily criticized by pro-government supporters. And these criticisms certainly do involve verbal attacks on their physical appearances. How does this situation affect the empowerment of women in politics and the employment of women in working fields?
That's a very interesting question. We have in Brazil lots of women who are politically active, be it in diverse social movements, in the women's movement, feminist movement, in particular in the Black Lives Matter movement, we would say. But it's true that in what concerns institutional politics, it's actually very hard for women to be elected. We right now only have women are 15% of the parliament, and this is already an increase in comparison with the previous years in which we had less than 10% of women in parliament, but it's still horrible, and Brazil is in very low ranked in what concerns gender equality in politics. So this is already an example of the structural inequality we live in terms of political representation and the possibility to discuss women's rights. So the discussion about, the criticism about the physical appearance of women in politics is just the tip of the iceberg, I could say. But it's very symbolic of how women are patronized, how they are objectified, and how they are disconsidered in their experience and actual political proposals in the country. So there's a long way still to fight for gender equality in politics, and that also, we can see that in not only in the political representation, but actually in the policies we have right now.
I hope we can all keep supporting you and your friends who are fighting for equality in Brazil. Brazil apparently is having the highest number of incarcerated women in the world. I have read many criticisms again, mostly about Black women, and them ending up being charged heavily, and also many other issues relating with women with children. Can you tell us what you think about these issues?
Yeah, it is true. The incarceration rate, in particular for women in Brazil, has been increasing for the past years, increasing dramatically. Just almost 500% increase in the last, 5 years. So it is absurd. And we know that these women are not just any women. They are not women like me, a white women, but just Black and Brown Indigenous women in particular, who are mostly incarcerated for crimes related to drug trafficking. And we know they are particularly targeted for these crimes when they live in particular regions, in particular areas, areas which are mostly composed by Black and Brown populations, etc., who live in a situation of poverty. So these are these women. This is not something we wouldn't expect. This is very, it's the scenario of the incarceration in Latin America, but it's important to highlight that this is the case also for women. And we know that right now, in the situation of the pandemic, it's getting also complicated because of the health crisis, because we have had a decision in our Supreme Court saying that these women should be released from prison, in particular when they haven't been already trialed, when they are pregnant, or if they have children of up 12 years of age. And even though we have this decision of the Supreme Court, we have recommendations of our National Justice Council, I guess this is the translation. This decision is not being actually enforced in the states. And we know that pregnant women or women who have recently given birth are at high risk of COVID-19. We have in Brazil the highest rate of maternal mortality due to COVID-19. So this is I know this is a ticking bomb. Having these women still incarcerated at this moment, we know that the carceral system is a focus of infection. And this is something we also have to think about at this moment.
Thank you. And are women of Brazil facing strip searches, which is an issue taking place in many countries all over the world, sadly? And if they are, how is this justified by the government, the strip searches, as it is very humiliating for women?
Yes, it is. And some states in Brazil have laws prohibiting this type of search. But this is still very, this is not unified in the country. Just some states have these laws. So there is a case right now which is pending in the Supreme Court to actually decide that this is unconstitutional for a series of reasons related to the human rights of women in particular, but also related to human rights of incarcerated people. But this is pending. This trial has initiated last year, but it hasn't been decided yet. So we don't have a federal, decision or unification of this evaluation yet, and the arguments against considering this type of search unconstitutional are usually related to the theme of drug trafficking, because there is a panic around this war against drugs, and usually it is said that it is still necessary to do this type of search to identify illegal drugs entering into prisons and fueling the illegal commerce of drugs. But we hope that the Supreme Court may rule this case soon to actually say that this is obviously unconstitutional due to being humiliating and obviously in conflict with other human rights we have already recognized.
It is very, very obvious from the example you have given at the start that the current government is not respectful to journalism nor human rights activism. And it seems like they have chosen to run hate campaigns against journalists and activists. How do you, as yourself who works in this field, feel about this?
Yeah, this is true. We know that Brazil is one of the most awful places to be if you are a human rights activist. We know a recent international rank showed that we are the country in which that mostly assassinates human rights defenders. We only lose for Colombia, which is the top one in this rank. And we know that in particular, the social movements that are attacked are the ones which are related to defending the rights of indigenous peoples, or the rights related to land and to climate change awareness, and the ones working to protect the Amazon forest, etc. But since Bolsonaro was elected, as I mentioned in our first question, we know that the attacks have increased against the women's rights groups, feminist groups, and in particular those working with sexual and reproductive rights. So, and this extends also to journalists, which is, you mentioned in your question, not only the human rights activists that work for organizations and social movements are attacked, but also journalists, and in particular women journalists. We know there is a campaign, a hate campaign against us, which currently is actually endorsed by the federal government, the president himself, and their supporters. So we know that it has never been easy to be a human rights defender in Latin America, but we know that the amount of the attacks and the gravity, the severity of the attacks increase dramatically when we have a government that actually actively endorses these attacks. So I guess it's very important right now to have international eyes on Brazil, international eyes on Latin America in general, but I would say in Brazil in particular, to help us make these attacks and these threats more visible, and to actually be able to fight them with international solidarity, I would say.
I do really hope us activists around the world, not only women, but everyone, can do something about the many crises in Brazil, because it's clearly it's a huge injustice, and there is something that needs to be done. I consider you a very, very brave person working in Brazil as an activist, a woman activist. It's so amazing of you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And now on to another guest of today's event. Hi, Louise. Thank you very much for joining us here. We are very honored to have you here today. So Louise Ann is a domestic abuse recovery coach who had experience growing up in a household with domestic abuse. But now she's helping women who had experienced the same thing to get back on their feet and live the lives they want to. So now, to start off, let me ask you, Louise, would you like to share your experience about abuse or anything related to abuse? How was it like?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for this opportunity. I love what you're doing and actually raising awareness for this, because I think it's such an important conversation to keep having. So my experience is I had a narcissistic and emotionally abusive father. So growing up, I experienced that is what a loving relationship was. You put the relationship that you witness from your parents, and that is what you tend to believe is the standard. So that's the standard you set for relationships going forward in your life. So when somebody came into my life and started treating me the way that my father had treated me and the way that my father had treated my mother, I labeled that as love. I believed that the control and all of that kind of thing was expressions of love. And I ended up in a 10-year relationship with this man. And I had 2 daughters with him. I didn't identify the abuse when I was actually in the relationship. When I filed for divorce, when I divorced him, emotional abuse was still not illegal in the UK. That only became illegal in 2015. So I had 2 daughters with him, and the reason that the relationship ended was because I found out he was having an affair. So that was the catalyst for me ending that relationship. Because of the emotional abuse not being recognised by the court, because of it not being recognised as illegal, I was given no support, no help. Mm-hmm. So when I went through, and it took 7 years for me to reach a point where I thought, you know, I'd done so much self-development, and I had done so many courses, and I had learned so much and so much investigation. I was like, I didn't want anybody to feel the way that I did and to go from where I was. So I started helping women so that they didn't have to spend 7 years studying this themselves. Mm-hmm. I could get them to that point a lot quicker.
So could you tell us, you know, the first signs when you realized that something was off, that this kind of, you know, way of loving is wrong?
When I found out he was having an affair, he moved out, and then he came back. And the difference between how I was behaving when he wasn't there to when he was there, I realized that I wasn't able to do little things that I should have been able to do. I would second guess them. I started recognizing I would ask for permission to go for a shower, or I would ask permission to do things that I should have had the freedom to do. I would be uncertain as to, I could say the same thing 2 days in a row, and the reaction that I would get would be very different. I would doubt myself. I would start to question myself. Things that he would say, And I knew he had said he would later deny, or he would say that I was making it up. I was crazy, you know, I'd misunderstood. And I started to recognize a lot of things that weren't adding up, and I was questioning my sanity, but I knew deep down that it wasn't me. So I knew, so when I started to see this disconnect between who I really was and who I was within the relationship, I identified that it had to end. So when I started doing the healing work, and when I started looking into all of the behaviors that I'd experienced, I found out about narcissism. And I started to research more and more, and it was like a checklist. It was like, yes, that I experienced that, and that. It was like the silent treatment for days because I burnt the toast or did something, you know, it was like the treatment that I experienced, it was like a checklist for emotional abuse. And so it was after that I started looking into how I actually recovered from that.
Yes, I think that's a very common problem with victims of domestic violence. They don't really realize that their relationship, that there's something wrong with the way they're being loved. And in the end, it is them who think they are the problem, or, you know, there's something wrong with them and not their partner or the relationship. And how about now, are you able to recognize, you know, when there's something wrong starting in a relationship? When you start something new, like talking to someone, and then you feel like, oh, this is happening again or something.
Yes, well, there's things called red flags.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually in an incredible relationship now, a very happy relationship with my partner. We have 2 more daughters. He's very loving and supportive, and he's helped me set up the business that I have. And he's a huge advocate for what I do and the work I do. And I wouldn't have the strength and capability of doing that without his support. So when we first got into a relationship, I was still very wounded, and I would lash out, and both of us had experienced toxic relationships. And so our demons kind of like attacked each other. It caused a lot of problems. But the things that you need to look out for is you need to learn to trust yourself. If you are still in a situation where you are doubting your own perceptions of reality, then it's not the right time for you to go into another relationship. And if the other person cannot respect that you need to heal, then they don't deserve to be in a relationship with you. So if you need to go through your own healing, and you need to reach that point where you love yourself and you feel good about yourself. So when you enter a relationship, you're not doing it for somebody else's approval and love and seeking that from somebody else. It's in addition to what you have in yourself. You need to have so much self-worth that when somebody does something that crosses your boundaries, you speak up about it. And if they continue to do that, you say, okay, enough is enough, I'm out. You need to have enough self-worth and self-belief that when people do start making you question your own perceptions, you believe yourself and you trust your instincts, and you are so sure of your own perceptions that when somebody tries to start gaslighting you and creating that doubt within yourself, you put it to a stop and you say, no, this is what happened, and they can't manipulate your thoughts to create that doubt.
Yes, that is a great advice for many women out there. I'm very happy for your current relationship, and I hope everything is going to go well. So now let me move on to another question. Is that how can women find what they deserve, or at least a way out of a unhealthy relationship in an environment where they are subjected to violence?
I think the biggest thing that people need to realize, and it is not saying that you should stay in that relationship, but what it is saying is the most dangerous time for any victim is when the relationship is ending. Because when an abuser has nothing else to lose, things can become a lot worse. So a victim of domestic violence or domestic abuse, if the abuser knows that they're losing control of the victim, they will ramp up the amount of abuse. They will start getting more violent. So a lot of people, it was kind of like the victim left and then went back. And that's when the victim was killed. The victim needs to be able to have an escape plan. So formulate how you are going to get out of that situation, how you are going to get out safely, and don't go back. It has to be a burn all bridges, you leave, and that is it. There is no stepping back into that relationship once you've gone, because when you step back, you are in more danger than you ever were before. Check your device, so your phone, make sure that there is no spyware. So find out about, there are so many charities, there are so many people that you can reach out to. Get somebody else to look on the internet, find out if there is any spyware on your phone. If there is, then you need to remove it. If there isn't, then you need to start recording. Get voice notes, create an external or an email address that the abuser doesn't know about. Record evidence, take photos. When you've experienced abuse and you are feeling horrific, record voice notes to yourself, begging yourself not to go back. Talk about how it feels in that point, because when you are leaving, you can end up filled with so much fear, you forget how bad it actually is in the moment. And so when you've got these recordings, email them to yourself, to this separate email address, delete them off your phone, delete them from your sent email, and so that you have an external email. They will be timestamped, they will be recordings of what you have experienced and what you have heard, and then you can go back and listen to those, but then you can also go back and use those as evidence to the police if you need to.
Okay, I see. Thank you. How about older generation? Do you think, for example, even your mom, do you think they recognize, that something was wrong when, in their times, that now it is changing, how, women are treated right now?
I definitely think that there is a recognition now within all generations, because social media and the conversations have become so public now, and access to information is a lot more readily available to all generations. I think that is one of the reasons that so many relationships are breaking down, because people are able to identify behaviours that have been very damaging for them, and they know that they don't have to tolerate that behaviour anymore. Before, we lived in a society where leaving your husband or, getting a divorce, breaking up was, seen as something that was very horrific. It was a failure, whereas it doesn't have that stigma anymore. So people now have the freedom to leave and actually have access to resources that will help inform them of what they experienced and how they can overcome it. Whereas before they didn't, and the only experience they had tended to be from their parents or older generations. And if it's a generational trauma, then the experience is passed from one generation to the next to the next.
Yeah, I think that is very true. When especially the older generation, they're talking about how there are not, as many marriages as there were before. But in reality, it's just, people are becoming more mature and they're more responsible about, who they're in a relationship with and how it may affect them and what actually comes after it and the dangers and the possibilities. So I think it is great that people are more aware of the problem now and how it can impact them. We would like to ask your opinion on how domestic violence affects women's social life and what are the consequences.
An abuser will tend to isolate the victim. So they will take away their options and take away their realizations of what else is out there. They take away the variables so that they remain in control, that they are the main voice that the victim hears and they are the main opinion that the victim listens to. So it means that there'll be a lot of isolation, there will be a lot of manipulation around relationships that you may have had. So friendships, there could be some derogatory remarks about, oh, well, she doesn't really like you, or, well, if she really thought that much of you, should treat you better, and all of this, lot creating doubts and insecurities between a woman and her female friends. Or there will be remarks about kind of like, oh, well, you're always doing so much for your family, but they never do anything for you, or, that your family never support us, or they never say anything nice about us, or, so that creates a divide between the woman and her family. So it's about isolating her. So it will usually mean that the woman, her social circle gets a lot smaller, her freedom to socialize or go out is restricted, because when a woman is out without her spouse, she is not under their control, and they don't like that.
Yeah, I think this is a major red flag when you just, get into a relationship with anybody, once they start isolating you from your friends and families, and then, tricking you into thinking that it is for your own good, that those people are not treating you right. Yes. And how do you think systematic or repeated abuse impact, thing like woman empowerment?
In an abusive relationship, there is not love. I had to face the fact my father didn't love me. If he did, he wouldn't have abused me. He wouldn't have said the things that he did. My ex-husband, he did not love me. And it's coming to terms with the fact that where there is abuse, there is not love. So what women need to realize is that if you are in a relationship where they are speaking to you badly, where they are treating you badly, where you are being controlled, where you are doubting yourselves, where you are being criticized constantly, that is not love. Love does not do that to somebody. So what you need to do is you need to give yourself the love that you are looking for from somebody else. When you experience love within yourself, when you are able to compliment yourself and you feel sure about yourself, and you are able to give yourself all of those things that you are looking for from an external partner, that's female empowerment. So that is where it comes from. And when you experience love, when you love yourself, you will not allow people into your lives, or you will not allow yourself to be in a relationship where you are not experiencing that from the other person, because suddenly you know what love is. So you need to learn to love yourself before you can actually allow anybody else to love you, because that is the standard you are setting. So how you treat yourself, or what you tolerate for yourself, is the level that everybody else will treat you with. And women have so much capacity for love. We can love so fiercely. What we need to learn to do is love ourselves as fiercely as we love our children, as we love our pets, as we love, our friends. We need to speak to ourselves like we would speak to somebody that we love dearly. And we need to do that for ourselves. And when we have that, that is the greatest gift women will give to themselves. It is the greatest gift that you give to your children, because you are giving them permission to love themselves. And it becomes a ripple effect. The more you love yourself, the more people around you love themselves, and then it spreads. And that's what women need to do, surround themselves. Women have been set against each other for so many years. What we need to do is we need to learn to love ourselves and love other women. And despite other women's faults, realize that they're doing the best they can with what they've got. And so having compassion, and that's how we empower ourselves and how we empower others.
While talking to you, I realized that I think everyone who is watching this live should be noting down what you're saying, because this is helpful. Thank you. Okay, let me move on to the last question then. So it is, I think, the most important question. And how can, in our community, for example, can we support and empower a friend or a family member who experiences, problems in a relationship or abuse?
I think the biggest thing that you need to realize is if somebody is not ready to be helped, there is nothing you can do. You cannot force somebody to accept help when they are not ready. You cannot force somebody to leave a relationship simply because you can identify that it is toxic, that it is abusive, that it is violent. If they are not ready to leave, there is nothing you can do. And the more you push them to leave that relationship before they are ready, the more you are likely to lose them. What you need to do is you need to realize you cannot help them when you are depleted. So first things first, you need to look after yourself. You need to make sure that when they are ready to leave, there is no problem in you actually being able to support them emotionally and mentally, because your mental health is so on point that you can help them. You are helping from a place of overflow. Love yourself and care for yourself, and know that by doing that, when they need you, you will be at your peak. and you will be able to help them all the more because you are in a good place. Then you need to keep the lines of communication open. A lot of people, a lot of victims, they will become very ashamed of what they have done. When you are in an abusive relationship, you can become somebody different. You can start to take on the personality traits of the person you're in a relationship with. When you are surrounded by that negativity and that anger so much, you start to take it in and you start to use that against other people. So when they come to you and they apologize about the way they behaved, or, you know, they feel insecure or ashamed of what they did or what they said, you need to just lay down, you know, I forgive you, I'm here for you, I'm so glad that you're here. And the person that they became in that relationship is not who they really are, and you know that. So you've just got to give them the freedom to go through this, forgive them, and then keep the lines of communication open. Even if they try to shut him down, just message them every so often, how are you? How's things? And that is it. Just let them know, I'm still here.
Yes, it is such a simple thing to do, but I think, you know, it gives the victim, or I don't know, anybody of your friends, you know, the feeling that they are supported, that they are loved, and that they can always, you know, come back to them for help. So this was our last question. Thank you very much, Louise. It was an incredible interview. I am very happy to, you know, be able here and ask you such kind of questions. So I hope this was a great lesson to our viewers as well. So please, let's give a round of applause to Louise, and thank you very much again.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Hello, and thanks everyone for joining us here again. We would like to welcome another guest of today's event. So Mahbouba, hi, we thank you for coming here, and we are very delighted to have you here today. So Mahbouba Jabin is a Bangladeshi journalist and human rights activist who lives in London right now. Aside from working as a journalist for the Bangladeshi and British media, she's also actively campaigning against domestic violence and fighting for human rights. And right now, she's teaching self-defense for the victims of domestic abuse and working to build awareness in the society about domestic violence. So as we know, you have built a shining and amazing career in Bangladesh. You had a gold medal in karate, you received your master's and worked as a journalist in Bangladesh. So let me ask you why you decided to come to UK and leave your home country.
In Bangladesh, I was a journalist by profession, and I was a student leader of current ruling party. And at some point, I had found my human rights was violated due to my personal choice about my family. There was a huge gap between my political views and personal choice. The behavioral application of my ex-comrades was very hostile to me. And this time was very risky for me and for my husband. And then I decided I wanted to get out of this suffocated state. Then I come to London.
I see, that's the reason why. Okay. So our research showed that situation of women in Bangladesh is really not good. Everyday women in Bangladesh have to face various physical and psychological forms of violence and abuse. And in just 2020, 235 women were killed by men. So can you please tell us about your experience related to women's rights violations in Bangladesh?
In Bangladesh, more than 2 decades, the highest level of government has become a woman. And in other sectors, the women have advanced in qualification and skills. Yet the violence against women continue to rise. The pattern of the violence against women has been changed, and the social insecurity makes women most vulnerable. In addition to physical attack, women are victims of rape, acid attack, social control, emotional abuse, bullying, stalking, even gender discrimination. According to human rights group Adhikar Report 2020, the victim of rape was 1,538 in 2020, and most of the victims was under 18 years old. In Bangladesh, the punishment for rape is death penalty, but so many cases go unreported because women fear they will be stigmatized, and for this reason, the reported conviction rate is very low. In Bangladesh, human rights have been violated all the time. At this moment, in Bangladesh, there are no freedom of speech, no freedom of speech, and no freedom of press. In Bangladesh, at this moment, there are no freedom of speech and no freedom of press. And kidnapping and extrajudicial killing is very common in Bangladesh. According to human rights group Adhikar Report, there are 225 incidents of extrajudicial killing in 2020. Shall I give one chart of like?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. And you can find it in online. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
According to Adhikar Report, extrajudicial killing was 225. Attack on journalists was 150. Dowry-related violence was 199. Rape was 1,538. Other sexual harassment and stalking was 157. Acid violence was 33. Despite the empowerment of highest level of Bangladesh, it remains outside the empowerment of the ordinary woman. Women's empowerment is also being hampered by the social attitude. Women are being deprived of their rights.
When you say social attitude, could you please give an example or details? What is it like?
When I was a student, school-going girl, and I started learning karate, but that time it was not easy to me, and it was not expected. It was not easy to me, and it was not accepted by the society and my relatives and friends, family. Only my mom, dad, and my brother, they supported me to learn karate. And after that, in 1995, I became a champion of karate in an international arena. I was the first woman champion in Bangladesh.
Yes, I
like
think you must feel like a pride to your country, you know, when everybody is looking down on you because you started, you know, karate, and there were not many supporters, and then in the end you came out to be a champion, a gold medalist. I think it's really great. You've done a great job.
Society didn't support me, but my family and my brother, particularly my brother, he supports me.
Did they support you? I mean, did you choose karate just because you wanted to learn like self-defense, or you were just interested in it?
You know, the self-defense is the best defense. I was a victim of stalking once in Bangladesh. After that, when I was 13 years old, I was a victim of stalking. After that, my brother encouraged me to learn karate, and I was a kickboxer as well. So that was my golden time, I can say.
It is great. I mean, something is starting as so simple, so small, and in the end, you came out to be the champion.
At that time, people came to see me because I was the only girl learning karate with lots of boys, at least 40 boys and one girl. It was like movie or drama like this.
Were there many other girls who started joining after they saw you getting the gold medal?
After my achievement, so many girls came to learn karate in same gymnasium and in my college as well.
Yes, I think that's great. I mean,
Yeah.
you were a great example, a role model for them now. That's great to hear. Were there like any other changes, for example, you know, before the society didn't look at them much, or they were considered like a taboo before, and now, you know, more girls, for example, are opening up to it and doing stuff?
In recent years, two other girls like Nishat and Ada Mahbuba, they become mountaineers and they win Mount Everest. In this week, one of Bangladeshi TV channel, they introduce one transgender woman as their newscaster. And I think it's a big change for Bangladesh.
Yes, it is. It's all thanks to women like you who are, you know, opening new changes and paths for the young girls and other people actually too.
Yeah.
What are the most common, you know, groups of women that come to you? Is it like young girls who want to defend themselves, or actual victims, maybe middle-aged women who have encountered domestic violence?
I'm working in East London. Here lives people from different countries and from different religions. So most of my students are victims of they are victims of violence. It's different kinds, like someone attacked in shop, someone pushed by some people, someone attacked by thugs, someone is victim of knife attack, someone is victim of racial attack. And so one girl, she came, somebody pulled her hijab from back, and one girl came, somebody pushed him from behind in the station. So different kinds of victim. From 16 to 75 years old victims came to me, and they learned self-defense.
I think it's great that women are now, you know, learning things that will help them, you know, encounter violence. But it's also at the same time terrific that a lot of women, you know, from the age of 17 to 75 have to encounter, you know, the problem. It's, I think, a big issue in the UK, in other countries as well.
Yeah. One of my students, she was 75 years old, and somebody pulled her bag from behind.
Yeah.
And I teach her how to save her vanity bag, and how to hold the bag tightly, and how to use her shopping to save herself.
What are you working on right now as a journalist?
At this moment, I am working as a freelance journalist, and I am writing for Bangladeshi newspaper and UK-based Bengali newspapers.
That is great. We wish you all the best and luck with your writing.
Thank you. And 2019, I wrote my story for The Guardian.
That's amazing. I mean, The Guardian is a famous magazine. It's a very famous platform. It's great that you got the story published. What story was it? If you don't mind me asking, of course.
Okay. No, it is about my story. It is all about my story. It was the part of refugee journalism project. I write my own story.
Okay, thank you very much. We will encourage our viewers to also check them out, as you have said.
Yeah.
I'm a counselor, psychotherapist, and coach. I'm also an author of Beauty Story. So I wrote Beauty Story a few years ago, actually, and it's to raise awareness, which is why I was excited when I got the email to say, yeah, join us, yeah? It's to raise awareness about how insidious domestic abuse can be. It's a fictional account based on my personal experiences and the experiences of other women that I'm aware of. But it's all fictionalized. The idea being that sometimes when we're close to an experience, we don't see it for what it is. When we see it happening to somebody else, or when we read about it as a fictional account, it's like, oh, so this is what's happening. So that's the idea about writing Beauty Story and talking about domestic abuse and training to be a counselor and a coach so I can support people, not just with issues of domestic abuse, of course. You know, there's life condition, there's all kinds of emotional and mental health issues that, you know, we struggle with. But I particularly love working with survivors, people who've experienced domestic abuse, because, yeah, it's got a special place in my heart.
Or what was your motivation behind, you know, working with people who have been abused domestically?
Haven't had the experience of domestic abuse myself many years ago, and haven't come out of it. It was a gradual process. Haven't come to understand what I was dealing with, and then making choices about the situation I was in, and then came out of it. And then I began to retrain to say, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Right? I'm not a spring chicken. And I discovered, actually, I've always loved supporting people. So why don't I find a way to support people in a way that's empowering for them, right? And of course, as I'm familiar with the issues of domestic abuse myself, naturally, I'm drawn to support people who've experienced domestic abuse and are wanting to rebuild their lives as a result of that, having come out of that experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good motivation. And I'm sure you're helping a lot of people in many ways. So my second question then would be, how can we define domestic abuse? Because I know when you say domestic abuse, sometimes we think of just the physical aspect of it, but there's more to that. How would you define domestic abuse?
Yeah, and this is part of the difficulty as well, actually, because when we think about domestic abuse, we think about domestic violence, and the terms are used interchangeably in the field. So domestic abuse or domestic violence are used interchangeably. Now, when we think about domestic abuse and domestic violence, we might be thinking, what might immediately come to mind is, oh, somebody was hit, right? Or she was given a punch in the face, or her hair was pulled out, and all of that. And yes, that happens. And that is horrible. No human being should be beaten by somebody else. Yes? Mm-hmm. However, before it gets to that stage, there would have been other forms of abuse as well. It doesn't usually, I'm not aware of an experience where the first assault was physical, mm-hmm. right? Usually before it gets to the physical, the person would have been called names. Mm-hmm. There would have been name calling, there would have been verbal abuse, there would have been psychological abuse, there would have been all other kinds of abuses. And then there's also the physical abuse. Okay, so there's also there's financial abuse as well. So where the woman is not allowed access to the family finances. She might not be allowed to work, or they might have had an agreement that, okay, we have young children, the man does the work, the woman looks after the children, and then she has no access to the family finances. She's given pocket money to buy groceries. She's monitored how she spends money. But it doesn't matter whether he goes to the pub or he buys a new car, because apparently he's earning, right? And she's not. So her work and her worth are undermined and devalued. And she's out of the job situation for so long that she loses confidence in herself. So that even when the children are old enough and they're back in school, she doesn't feel the confidence to go out. She's been undermined in that way. That's one strand of financial abuse. There's the other strand of financial abuse where the man, doesn't make any financial contributions. So the woman is working herself to the bone, sometimes doing 2 or 3 jobs, as well as looking after the household to make sure that the bills are being paid, while the person she's married to is doing whatever else he wants to do. That is also financial abuse. And that can be devastating. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've talked about physical, verbal, psychological. One psychological abuse that happens a lot is gaslighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
where,
a very popular term, and I think a lot of
yes,
people are talking about it.
yes, it's a situation where you are caused to doubt your reality, right? So the difference between gaslighting and lying, because this tends to be a question, is this gaslighting, or if somebody tells a lie, does it mean they're trying to gaslight me, or am I making it all up, right? So let's say we agreed you take the kids to school tomorrow at 8 o'clock,
Okay.
right? We agreed, we spoke about it last night. You take the kids to, I normally take them to school, but I've got an appointment in the morning. So you are taking them to school. This is before COVID, where school was normal, right? Now it's all online. So anyway, so come the next morning, it's 7:45. I'm like, you said you take the kids to school. You don't seem to be getting ready. Oh no. So you now turn around to me and say, no, I did not say that. I'm like, yes, you did. We had this agreement. No. Is it your time of the month or something? Because you get forgetful when it's your time of the month. You see what I mean? So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe I forgot. Maybe it's actually my time of the month and I forgot. So I begin to doubt myself. I begin to doubt my reality.
So this is also a form of, it goes under psychological abuse, I guess, then.
It's psychological abuse.
Yeah. Okay.
And when this happens often enough, of course, I'll doubt myself. I can't trust what I'm experiencing. I can't trust my memory. I can't trust myself. I'm now depending on you. I'm depending on this other person for my reality to tell me what is real.
Mm-hmm.
And that can cause a lot of emotional and mental health issues.
Yeah.
There's also sexual abuse.
Yeah. That's an important.
Yeah. And sometimes it can be difficult for women to own up to the fact that actually I've been raped by somebody who loves me. Or at least somebody who says they love me, and somebody whom I love. Marital rape happens. Marital sexual assault happens, and it all comes under domestic abuse. It's all part of the workings, the principle, the philosophy of domestic abuse is around intimidating and controlling somebody else. It's coercive control. It's to make this other person your own puppet, to do it as you please, to undermine and disempower somebody else.
Yeah, thank you for that thorough response. I'd like to know, how common is domestic abuse in the UK?
It's very common. I mean, I don't have the statistics to hand. Maybe 1 in 4. Maybe 1 in 4 women will have experienced domestic abuse at some point in their lives. I don't know what the figure is for men. It does happen with men as well, but it's much more common with women. Yeah, it's so common, it's actually embarrassing. Mm-hmm. that at this point in the 21st century, domestic abuse is still a thing, and children are growing up in households where they're experiencing one partner being abused by another. Mm-hmm. It's shameful.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. So then let's move on to the next question. What is the psychological impact of repeated abuse on the victim?
It's a traumatic experience. Sometimes we might think about trauma as one singular incident where maybe you had somebody went on holiday and there was an accident and then their friend died or whatever. That is trauma. Or you've gone to war, of course. That is the kind of trauma that we're familiar with, post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder or something, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah? That happens with veterans of war. Victims of domestic abuse experience post-traumatic stress syndrome because of being in a situation where it's like being at war. You're constantly undermined, you're constantly, you're hypervigilant because you don't know when this other person is going to go off at you, your abuser. They might wake up on the wrong side of the bed and decide it's your fault. They might have a bad dream and blame you for it. But when you haven't yet found your place, when you haven't yet recognized that actually this is wrong, I cannot be blamed for somebody else's dream or somebody else's bad behavior. You might be like, oh, sorry, you had a bad dream. Shall I make you a cup of tea? You see what I mean? So you're playing into that, I will make it better for you. I want to help you make it better. You had a bad dream, you're having a go at me, don't worry about that. I will make it better. So back to the question, what was the impact? Trauma, complex trauma, PTSD, never mind depression and anxiety, that's kind of constant. Hypervigilance, constant. Self-doubt, lack of self-worth, trust issues, constant. Feeling very unsafe in the world, constant.
Yeah. And low self-esteem, I'd assume low self-esteem comes along with that.
Yeah.
So my next question is, does work and education become limited for women who are experiencing domestic violence?
Yes, it can be, because you're in a situation at home. This idea that home is a safe place, it can be traumatic in itself. If your home is meant to be a safe place, but your home is a war zone, right? Your home, where you're supposed to feel safe, is a place where you're being beaten physically or beaten down mentally, you know? So if you're in that kind of state, how can you focus on education? How can you focus at work? Now, there are women who actually go to work to escape, right? I'm safer at work. I can be myself at work. I can excel at work. And then when it's time to come home, it becomes a problem. What can happen also is that the abuser might now try to sabotage your work. So they might know you have, for instance, you have an important presentation the next day, and they make sure you don't sleep the night before. They make sure they find something to have a go at you over, so that you're not prepared for your interview or your presentation or whatever. So you can be undermined in so many different ways, just so that you're not empowered, to live your life. That's your life to live, really, as an autonomous individual being.
It sounds like it's a constant, psychological battle.
Oh yeah. Part of why it's difficult is that there's a cycle of abuse. Yeah, there's a cycle where, yes, it's hot, there's a conflict, there's the undermining, and then it gets quiet. And sometimes it actually gets good, quote unquote, where the abuser might apologize or might act as if nothing has happened, right? And then the victim are like, okay, I think things are okay now. Maybe if I can just act a bit better, or if I can just improve my cooking, or if I can just improve how I look or whatever, we might never have that bad experience again. He's happy now, all is well, right? And then that happens for a while, and then things become shaky again, and then there's the explosion. And because of this cycle of abuse, it's sometimes difficult to see the difference, to see that there's a pattern. It might be difficult to see, actually, there's a link, there's a pattern. This is not a one-off situation where, yes, couples argue, right? This is not a question of where couples who are equal and mutual in the relationship are having an argument, where they're needing to work on their communication issues. Domestic abuse is not about communication issues. Domestic abuse is not about stress. Domestic abuse is not about, life is difficult at work. Domestic abuse is about one person wanting to exercise power and control over the other. So there's a pattern. And victims can get stuck in the pattern such that even after the relationship has ended, they are still stuck in their minds as to what could I have done better to make the relationship work? Why do I still have feelings for him if it was so horrible to me? But it wasn't all horrible. There were times when it was okay. Or the times when it was okay, was that not real? Do you see what I mean? So it can be very confusing. The fact that the relationship has ended doesn't mean that the survival, the work of healing hasn't finished.
Yeah.
It needs to continue even after the relationship has ended.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're explaining these. I think people need to know, because many times I know people they start blaming themselves for being in that kind of relationship. And the fact that you've touched on, the cycle and the pattern and them not being able to differentiate, I think now I understand that this is why people continue to stay in these kind of relationships, because they can't tell the difference. And because it's getting better, they believe, okay, it's going to change, and they continue to stay. But obviously it takes time to understand this is ongoing, it's a cycle, it's constant. And yeah, so I've actually had an understanding into that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
So my next question is, how does this kind of trauma affect the daily life of a woman? What kind of work do you do with them to overcome this?
I work with her to find her voice. I work with her to find what it is she wants for herself. I work with her to get an understanding of what she's experienced, you know, and to find ways to set herself free from the entrapment that the domestic abusive experience has put her in.
Okay, so let's move on to our next question. How could victims of abuse be empowered? And maybe I should ask, how can those around them help in order to empower them? So friends and family, for example.
The first thing I will say, which I guess answers both questions really, is listen to them. Listen to them and believe them. They might not even describe it as domestic abuse. They might not even know how to describe it as abuse.
And that they feel ashamed.
But when they've come to say, actually, this is going on in my relationship, he does this, he says this, he does the other, right? Don't turn around and say, oh, no, you must be mistaken. He's such a nice guy. Of course, he's a nice guy. You see him once in a year or at Christmas or whatever, where he puts on his best behavior. This is somebody that lives with him day to day. So listen to her and believe her. Suspend your disbelief, right? Because sometimes people like to look at the window dressing. You know, people like to say, oh yeah, but he loves you. Yeah, you are telling me he loves me, but I'm living with him and he's treating me like a piece of something that stuck to the bottom of his shoes. But you are telling me, is it for you to tell me that you see what I mean? Because by you disbelieving this woman, you are further tying her in the complexity of the situation she's in. Because now she goes back and thinks, there's got to be something wrong with me if I can't see that he loves me, but everybody else is seeing it. Mm-hmm. So the first thing you need to do is believe her. And the next thing you need to do is don't put her under any form of pressure. Okay, so there are also those that might believe her, right? There are also those that might have seen past the appearances, because some abusers are quite bold and they will do things in public. So there will be some that will have said, okay, he's spoken to her in that way in public. I wonder how it's like in private. And then they might want to put pressure on her to take action. But then you can't put pressure on her either. She's got to understand it for herself and find the time and the space within herself to discover what it is she wants to do. Mm. And if she decides she wants to remain in the relationship, it's her right to do that. So don't put her under pressure. Don't tell her what to do.
Yeah.
So victims and survivors can feel very isolated. And I believe it's important to reach out to groups and networks that are supportive and offer a healing presence and offer a healing place. And this is why I have set up my Freedom from Domestic Abuse therapeutic program. It's an online program where people can come together. I've actually based it on Beauty Story, which is, like I said earlier, is fictional. So that if people don't want to talk about their own stuff, if they're not ready or willing to talk about their own stuff, that is fine. We can learn about domestic abuse in a safe way, and whatever issues might come up, because if we're talking about somebody else's, even though fictional, you will think about your own experiences, isn't it? And the pain and whatever might come up because of my training and my experience as a psychotherapist. I can work with that in that program to help women begin to recover, from their experiences and get stronger within themselves. When we talk about domestic abuse and the impact, it's devastating, it's horrible, it's horrendous. And sometimes victims, survivors, and their friends and family, they can think, oh my goodness, my life is over, I'll never be the same again, I've had this horrible experience, and so on and so forth. And yes, it's horrible. I also like to say there's life after domestic abuse. The fact that you experience domestic abuse doesn't mean your life is over. It just meant at this point in time, you had this horrible experience. You can come out of it, you can learn about it, and you can grow and live a full, satisfying life, even though you experience domestic abuse at some point.
Yeah, I think it's great that we've left it on a positive note, and the work you do just sounds amazing. I'm sure you impact these women in such great ways, allowing them to regain their life and their independence, really. So yes. I think that's amazing.
It's very satisfying.
It must be for you, yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to stay in touch for another, hopefully, event.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to speak my passion.
Could you tell us a little bit about your own life story from maybe Turkey to becoming an exiled journalist, and how you think maybe your own story fits into the trajectory of women in Turkey and women's rights in Turkey?
Yeah, by definition, because I'm a woman, my story fits into any definition, of a woman's story in Turkey. But basically, I left Turkey about 5 years ago, exactly 5 years ago, actually, after the government brutally took over our newspaper as a result of a police raid. I used to lead the largest English daily in Turkey named Today Zaman. It was part of the largest media group in Turkey, Feza Media. And because the newspaper had a critical editorial line, the government turned it into a target for about a couple of years. And then finally, it unlawfully seized the newspaper. And because we were accused of terrorist propaganda, I knew that eventually they would target the executives. And because I was among the leading names of the newspaper, I decided to leave Turkey. Before that, I worked in the bureaucracy. Even before that, I worked in Washington, D.C. at a think tank for a while, and I studied political science in the United States. But because I thought Turkey was getting better in late 2000s, I decided to return to my home country, but apparently it was a mistake.
Thank you. So, I mean, you kind of touched upon the areas in which your career was based, so journalism and political science. As a journalist, the Committee to Protect Journalists has, stated amongst many other organizations that Turkey is the second largest jailer of journalists in the world. And you mentioned, as a woman, your story reflects that of women, but is there anything particular that you would like to share on behalf of perhaps the struggles that female journalists in Turkey face that maybe their male counterparts don't face?
Well, it's hard to distinguish male versus female journalists, because Turkey is a hell for any kind of journalist right now. As long as you are critical, as long as you dare to question the rhetoric of the government, you are under huge threat. So they do not specifically target female journalists. But on social media, it's usually easier to target female journalists, because female women are considered more vulnerable and fragile, and you are easily targeted with sexist words, profanity. So the only difference would be just being an easier target, especially on social media. However, when it comes to persecution of the government, I don't see a gender difference, because right now it's hell for everyone in Turkey. But I know that my female journalist friends who are imprisoned right now in Turkey, because of their gender, they are more likely to be subject to sexual harassment. And Şenur Parıldak, a young journalist who used to work at Zaman Daily, she wrote in a letter that she was subject to sexual harassment. So that's one more extra level of pressure or human rights violation that female journalists are facing.
You touched upon how journalists, or as a journalist, you were under watch and kind of labeled as a terrorist by the state due to your profession. And very recently, in Turkish media, the kind of sexualization of the female body in relation to those who are under crimes and being tried as terrorists due to their professions has kind of been under the limelight. And, you know, within that, there's the issue of strip search and that happening on various times, and then the denial of that. And also, you know, the kind of the other pink room terminology and stuff that's being used against people, especially people who kind of came from your profession or maybe a more intellectual profession. There's a denial of that in Turkey by state officials that such sexual harassment is going on. What would you say about that in relation to human rights? You know, it's clear that it is occurring.
Yeah, unfortunately, human rights violations are so grave in Turkey that strip search is only a very minor part of it, even though in and of itself it's a major violation. And they even strip search babies and little children around the age of 9, 10, 11, and they are traumatized. And strip search is not something new, apparently, but apparently, according to previous practice, it was used as a kind of a precaution in the case of, real criminals. But everybody knows that these people who are politically targeted by the government and who are held as prisoners, everybody knows that these are totally innocent and peaceful people. They are doing this strip search in order to denigrate them, in order to humiliate them. So it's kind of obviously it's a type of psychological and physical abuse in order to humiliate them even further, even though everybody knows that these people are perfectly innocent. But again, going back to the bigger picture, right now in Turkey's overcrowded prisons, actually, hundreds of thousands of people, innocent people, men, women, children, elderly, sick, cancer patients, you name it. They are arbitrarily held as political prisoners. And instead of focusing on the strip search only, we should not let the government to try to minimize the issue into this specific sphere, but also but focus on this major human rights violations problem in Turkey. So you're right. I mean, it's despicable. It's so shameful that especially female deputy Özlem Zengin, she is in so much denial. She initially denied the strip search when everybody spoke up, and she said that, oh, you know, people with the linked with the Gülen movement on purpose, they become pregnant on purpose to make people say that, oh, they keep these people in prison with their babies. This is so insane, so despicable, but it's happening in Turkey. But this is not something new. Unfortunately, this government, this regime, their spokespeople, they will distort the facts in order to keep them in power. So they're always in denial. They know that they are wrong. They constantly lie. But that's the way how oppressive governments work, right?
I mean, I think especially in terms of when we describe authoritarian regimes, perhaps populist regimes, and people do define what's occurring in Turkey in very different ways. So, you know, to bring the conversation back to the issue of women's rights, the type of sexualization is prevalent in their discourse everywhere. I mean, I remember a couple of years back, Erdogan was saying that, you know, it was a sin for women to use contraception or in you know, relations, for example, and that it was trying to find some sort of a religious basis for this. And this was something he was saying to his own followers, you know, have more children and don't do that, don't, you know, protect or engage in some sort of family planning. So the type of kind of sexualization, it's used to demonize both his own followers, whether they're aware of that or not, and also those political prisoners. But as you kind of mentioned, it's not a new issue. It's something that does have a history in Turkey. Is this just a political issue? Is it a cultural issue? Can we bring it out into different spheres as well? or is it something that's unique to this current regime? And will, you know, when with regime change, will it change?
I don't think so. As you know, this regime is a product of the society, right? I mean, obviously, this is the level of atrocities that they commit against, especially a certain group of people, Gulen movement followers and Kurds. It's kind of unprecedented. But this doesn't mean that Turkish state was democratic or it had complete rule of law before. I mean, Kurds had been systematically targeted, discriminated, women and man, women, children, everyone. My hope is that there is so much concentration of power in one hand right now. If there's a regime change now, at least Turkey might have the chance to go back to its mediocre state in terms of rule of law. So even if they begin to apply some of the laws, or even they begin to adhere to the existing constitution, it would just improve the situation for so many people. But of course, removal of Erdogan from power is not going to like magically change the whole Turkish society. He is a product of the Turkish society.
Okay, interesting perspective. You know, just looking at, I mean, you were able to flee to the US and carry on, you know, your life with I'm sure varying difficulties as well, and many people, many women and young women as well from Turkey, you know, trying to do the same. Some go to the US, some Europe, some other countries as well. During this kind of journey, the main route that's used by many is the traveling through the river. We've seen, you know, just I think it was maybe yesterday or the day before, you know, a 9-year-old.
The day before,
yeah, yeah, a 9-year-old girl drowning whilst trying to flee and be reunited with her father. So I think the kind of moral there is, you know, we're talking about a 9-year-old girl who was drowned, someone who had to flee, you know, as an adult with your own career. This is something that transcends ages and generations. Why is it happening, you know, if you could describe it?
Yeah, for those who are not familiar with the issue, even this example by itself actually tells us how horrible the situation in Turkey right now. These are regular people, citizens of Turkey who used to have regular lives before the failed coup attempt of July 15. They were simply fleeing the persecution in Turkey, as I've been mentioning, targeting the sympathizers of the Gülen movement. I mean, and I think as far as I read most of these people who are trying to illegally flee Turkey because their passports were revoked were teachers, doctors, engineers, people who have no political affiliation at all. They are not even journalists. I mean, of course, it's not normal for journalists to try to flee their own country illegally, but it happens in autocratic regimes, right? But in this case, since 2016, because so many people have been subjected to massive oppression in Turkey, they have no chance. So they face death as a family, you know. And in the case of Nur Efşan, apparently the father was able to flee Turkey, and because the mother's nonsense case in the court she was convicted over a nonsense terroristic accusation, obviously, just like millions of other people in Turkey. So they had no choice but to flee because they are not even allowed. I mean, the society punishes them, but at the same time, they don't want them to leave. So they just want them to suffer, even in the maximum possible way. And unfortunately,
yeah, sorry to disrupt you just there, but I think that is the punishment itself. You know, they want to ensure that these people are punished. They don't want them to flee. It's a recurring.
It's so tragic that I think in future people of Turkey will say, "Oh my God, how did these happen? How did we let all these happen in year 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21? We let children drown in the river, you know, just separating Turkey from Greece because they were just fleeing from Turkey, you know, because of an unlawful persecution." Right now, you know, I mean, that's this hypocrisy of the Turkish society really drives me crazy, because I know that Turkish people nowadays love this stories from the days of the 1980 coup attempt. Of course, at that time, so many people suffered, and now Turkish people are crying rivers, you know, over these stories. One of them is Miracle in the Seventh Ward or Seventh Cell. It's on Netflix. If your viewers could check it out. And people cry, but at this real life inspired story. But at the moment, as they watch them online, even worse stories are taking place, and they don't even just flinch. It's unbelievable. I just because my explanation for that is right now it's costly to speak against injustice. You might be targeted, you might be jailed, you might be labeled Gülenist, etc., etc. But it's easy to cry about the injustices of the past. It has no cost.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to, you know, young girls and women fleeing Turkey at the moment? Motivate them. Perhaps this is, you know, putting you on the spot now, but is there anything you'd like to share with them?
People who have been following me on Twitter and on my own YouTube channel, of course, mostly in Turkish. I also tweet in English just to voice the injustices in Turkey. Everybody knows that I always suggest people to flee Turkey because it's a hopeless case. It's not going to get any better. And the younger you flee, the luckier you are, because the younger you go abroad, the higher chances of establishing a new life for yourself. Because as you get older, it becomes harder to receive education from scratch again, or to find a job. So I always consider those who leave Turkey at a young age lucky. And I always say that it's much better to have a mediocre or ordinary life in a Western democracy than having a like upscale or more privileged life in a place like Turkey. That's my advice to young people all the time. And I don't think that they will ever regret. I grew up in and I used to love does not exist anymore. As long as they work hard and they are willing to, you know, take all these challenges, I think the future will be brighter in especially in democratic countries, of course.